Before we go on to a couple of questions, I know we touched on a couple of the, let's say, the cognitive or sort of the brain tactics and strategies to deal with anxiety. Allison, are there others that we haven't touched on that you think are worth mentioning when folks are trying to figure out, hey, how can I deal with, test anxiety so that I can be successful in these tests?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So let me just mention a couple of sort of broad ones
Mm-hmm.
that might benefit the majority of people. Of course,
Mm-hmm.
when you're, doing like individual or private tutoring with Laura, it's likely that she might make specific recommendations, for an individual, but some general stuff. So one of the most important ones, let's start with some cognitive things. So cognitive, we're referring to like our brain and how we're thinking. So important to tell yourself, I do not have to get every answer correct. I do not need to earn a perfect 100% on this test. And to even maybe take that a step further and say, I'm definitely going to get answers wrong on the test. I am absolutely not going to get every answer right. And I'm certainly going to see things that I haven't seen before. And that's okay because I don't need a 100%.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then another cognitive piece, telling yourself, my anxiety does nothing to serve me. All that my high anxiety is going to do on test day is prevent me from showcasing all that I have learned. So, just remembering this high anxiety has no benefit in my world at all. Um, and let's see, another
Allison,
thing.
you
Sorry,
brought
Laura.
up a really good point. So the whole fear about these exams, like, right, what triggers all the anxiety is you don't want to open that email and get the letters like fail in size 48 font like shoved in your face, right? It's pretty, that's also a pretty terrible part of the exam. I'm not quite sure why the text has to be so large, but here's the thing, and you can really only appreciate it in hindsight. So those of you that are currently testing, just try to put yourself in a mindset that you can understand, but failing is not terrible. Going into that exam is a huge accomplishment. And to be honest, so I failed 3 of the 7 exams that I took for 4.0. The ones that I passed, the 4 that I passed the first time, I do not have any retention of that material. The ones that I retook, I was able to retain that information and I can still use it in my practice. So failing, which is what we're getting so concerned about, isn't that bad because it gives you an opportunity to really become a better architect, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's the whole reason of this process.
Yeah, I think that's a really good
Absolutely.
one.
And
Go ahead, Allison.
sorry, Mark, I didn't mean to talk over you.
No, go ahead.
And like Laura, I failed my licensure exam the first time that I took it, and it was the greatest gift to me, as a clinician ever. If I had passed it the first time, I think I would have had a very I I would have thought that I was a lot more knowledgeable than I really was. And to this day, even with testers who have retaken the licensure exam 5, 6, 7 times, when they do pass it, to this day, I have never surveyed a tester who has said, I should have passed it sooner. They always say, I'm glad it happened this way. This is
Mm-hmm.
how it needed to happen. So it is a gift. And going back to and I mean, another thing too, I guess along these same lines, this process is supposed to be hard. If it were easy and if everyone passed this exam, I mean, that might be concerning. But going back to the cognitive part of things too,
Mm-hmm.
and like, the things to tell yourself to manage the anxiety, another thing you can tell yourself, and I know the voice of high anxiety is so loud, and fear of failure, it creates so much noise in our brains. But if you can just try to silence that noise, and maybe even just buy into the idea, I only have to keep my anxiety under control for these 3 to 5 hours that I'm taking the exam. That's it. As soon as this is done, and I deserve that. I have worked hard for this. I deserve to feel calm and at peace as I work through this exam. And then when the test is over, I can be as stressed out and as anxious as I want to be. So that's another cognitive piece that can help some testers. And then a couple of behavioral things. So this is a pretty obvious one. We all, many of us know the benefits of deep breathing. It really does work. So deep breathing in between each question that you're asked, like just doing one really big inhale and one really full exhale in between each question can help with anxiety management. If you feel a high spike in anxiety, maybe you see a question that is like in an area that you were just hoping you wouldn't see on your test, so your anxiety rises quickly, take a second to double up on those breaths. Do 2 or 3. And a tip is, again, do a full inhale, but when you do your exhale, really extend that out breath. So it's like every bit of air is out of your lungs. And also envisioning when you are doing this deep breathing, like that your heart is what's doing the breathing, like from your chest. That can be a helpful behavioral tool as well. Progressive muscle relaxation involves kind of going from like the head to the toes and relaxing every muscle in the body. When we're experiencing high anxiety, our body just tenses up. So, you can start with your head, relaxing your face muscles, relaxing your shoulders, your stomach muscles, and you can clench the muscles and then release them. That helps. But if you don't have time to do like a full body scan, one quick little tip, this is one of my favorites. Like I said, every muscle gets tense when we're feeling highly anxious, but this helps so many people. And it might sound kind of weird, but release the tension in your tongue muscle. Often when we're tense, we find our tongue is tense and pushed up on the top of the roof of our mouth. But if we relax that muscle, we can actually experience, for some people, they can experience muscles release in other parts of their body too. And the last thing for a quick little behavioral tool, one of the ways to manage test anxiety in the evaluative situation is to stay present. To really be connected with yourself and your body. So a grounding technique to keep you present, and this also might sound kind of silly, squeezing your thumb or feeling your feet on the ground. This can bring you to center and make you, bring you to feeling present in the moment. Those are just a couple tips.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. And now architects are going to be the most made fun of people in all the Prometric employee lounges, because we're going to make all these these funny, awesome motions. What's with architects and they're sticking out their tongues? God, they're so funny. The accountants, they don't do that. I'm sure.
Awesome. What's great about those two techniques though, relaxing the tongue muscle and squeezing the thumb or feeling your ground on the floor, it's helpful in as it relates to being in a testing situation that's anxiety provoking, but those are also tools that can help with general anxiety in other situations too. And no one will know you're doing them. No one can see what you're doing. So it's they're helpful and discreet.
Yeah.
Yeah,
right.
I feel like I could do some of those in client meetings. That is great advice, Allison.
Oh, good.
I love it. So thank you for that. I think those are awesome tips for folks. If you're catching yourself caught up in a little anxiety, I think, or even a lot of anxiety, it could certainly help. We have a couple of questions from the group and a couple of comments. A couple of people are mentioning that Laura, you mentioned something about that sort of brain dump onto the paper during the pre 15 minutes. Some folks are saying, wait a minute, maybe that's not allowed anymore. And then there's a couple of other comments about a couple of things to remind yourself about the rules of Prometric. And so what I'll say is that just remember that, listen, the rules change from time to time. So Laura's telling her story from when she did it. It's quite possible that the rules have changed. But what I would recommend, sort of the key principle here is, as I said, make sure you review the rules that Prometric has. You know, NCARB has their rules for their part, but then Prometric has their rules too. So it's not just sort of one thing; it's both. You have to make sure you review them. And then let's see.
Yeah, and if Prometrics change that and you can't initiate anything on your scratch paper till you begin the exam, then I would change it up and I would do it at the beginning of the exam if needed. If you need that confidence booster, if there's anything that you've been confusing, I mean, that scratch piece of paper is there for you to use.
Yes, and you know, I think when I look at the questions that we have here, again, a lot of them are really specific to sort of the rules around Prometric, which we're not going to get into. So, Emmeline here mentions, which is an interesting one, and I know I've heard it a number of times before, a comment about, you know, having anxiety around not knowing vocabulary because maybe English isn't you know, the first language, and that acts as another layer of difficulty. I wonder if either of you have any comments for those of our listeners out there who maybe English isn't their first language, and how to maybe, certainly that complicates things a little bit or maybe a lot. Any thoughts on how to kind of handle that, guys?
I mean, do you want to start?
Yeah, it's definitely an added challenge, right? So the AREs, they're only offered in English. There's no other option to take it in an alternate language. And yes, so if you studied internationally and then you're testing in the United States, it is a bit of a disadvantage, but it really shouldn't be any vocabulary that you don't see in the office every day. I think that they've done a really great job, NCARB has, to make these exams kind of universal for all testing applicants. So, I mean, just prepare with, if you prepare with the testing material and black spectacles and anything else that's out there, I think that you should be adequately prepared and you're not going to be stuck on specific words.
I think maybe just to that point, Laura, you may, if you're one of these people, you may actually adjust your timing and your strategy for when you decide to start taking the exams by saying, hey, listen, I haven't worked in an office for a couple of years yet, and it would be a good idea to get some of that vocabulary sort of under my belt and to have the experience of working with architects, you know, in a real office so that I encounter much more of that language of vocabulary. And so you might delay and you might wait a couple of let's say years or maybe months. Also, you know, you might actually make you know, that material, so maybe you know, notching up your abilities with the English language, you might make that part of your prep. You might, you know, take you know, a course or two to try to let's say improve your skills in that area before you start studying, or maybe alongside you're studying for the exam as well. So it might just be, you know, something just like some people, they need to you know, maybe increase their, you know, their basic math skills. So they might take a course in this or that. You know, you may add that to your study regimen as well. Allison, I think I maybe have cut you off there. Was there something else that you had?
Oh, no. So yeah, I was going to say that this is a real issue. This does create anxiety for people. If English is not the first language on a credentialing exam, it is only offered in English. Other things that are along these same lines too include, you know, learning difficulties. Maybe someone has a specific learning disorder or ADHD, or they might have visual impairment issues that could present challenges. And so I'm not sure what the rules are around this, but I would encourage testers to to contact, I don't know if they would contact NCARB, but or the testing center itself, but to determine if there are any special accommodations offered for whatever that particular issue is. In the exam that I specialize in working with, like for example, if someone has ADHD and distractibility is a major problem, with medical documentation, they might qualify for a special accommodation of having their own private testing room or having extended time. And for testers that English isn't the first language, the special accommodation that's often offered to my testers is a dictionary that translates from whatever the language is to English. If special accommodations are not an option, you know, this is, Mark, what you were saying, you know, turn that into part of your study process, like, you know, and to really, to be more specific, keep track maybe of certain terms or words that you come across that aren't clear to you, and present those to your private tutor, present those to Laura and say, can you help me understand what this means in this context? I often have some of the work that I end up doing is helping testers who English is not their first language determine what it means when a case is presented and says something like, the client feels blue. And a tester is like, what does that even mean? Because that's a term that makes sense to many people that speak English, but to someone that doesn't, that could be really confusing. So just having someone that you can just verify things with and say, help me understand these terms, can be helpful.